Hello, welcome to my 60s swirl tutorial. This is what I use for a lot of the pieces in my Flower Power collection. So to start off with, you can see I've chosen 3 colours here: an apricot, an oat and a pink. I would say if you've got any dark colours in there, maybe use kind of less of the dark colours because they can become quite overwhelming, and more of the lighter colours, but it's totally up to you. I've rolled these out to half a sheet of what I normally roll it out to, so I think on my Atlas 180 that's number 3. Half the thickness. I've rolled them all out and I've cut them all into equal sections. For this tutorial you'll need an acrylic roller, a blade of some sort, and then some dotting tools. I got mine from Amazon. I will put a link in the Patreon description so you can see which ones I've got, and you can also use some cutters. You can see I've got some circular cutters there as well. It's also really important that I mention that I didn't make up this technique. It is based on a Japanese metal work technique called mokumgane, and I think polymer clay artists have adapted that and use that technique to transfer over to polymer clay. So that's where this technique comes from. So I just start taking my pieces of clay and placing them one on top of the other. And what you want to be really careful to do when you're doing this is lay them down very carefully, like so you don't get any air bubbles in between the 2 pieces of clay. So I kind of start at one end and kind of smooth it down to the other end. Does anyone think that they look like little slices of cheese? So yeah, I'm sort of doing this in a random order pretty much. I'm obviously not putting 2 of the same colour next to each other. I'm just laying them all one on top of the other. Again, being very careful not to get any air bubbles. Last few pieces. Okay, so now you should have a big stack of sort of sheets of clay, and I just use my acrylic roller just to again roll very lightly over the top to make sure that there are no kind of air bubbles trapped in there. Okay, so now the fun bit. So on one side, you want to take some dotting tools and start pushing them into the clay. You want to try and go as far through the clay as you possibly can. So you can see I'm really pushing this dotting tool right in so it goes right down to the last layer of clay. I'm just kind of doing that randomly over the surface. Make sure you go right to the edge. You really want to kind of get all the areas. You can use, I would say experiment with different dotting tools because different tools will create different effects. But I tend to use kind of 3 or 4 different sized dots, and I'll show you as well. I use cutters some of the time as well. So I'm just kind of doing this randomly, and I'm also kind of overlapping some of the dottings. Now I'm using kind of a really small dotting tool. Again, pushing it right down so it goes right the way through the clay, and I'm kind of doing it over the surface, but I'm also doing it kind of inside some of the other marks that I've made. So it's kind of quite a random technique. So once you're happy with what you've done, you need to squidge it back together. So this bit feels a bit weird. So you have to start kind of pressing in the sides and squidging all the clay back into kind of your original shape of a rectangle. So you can see I'm just squidging the sides. And then what I'll do at some point is, grab the acrylic roller and just roll across the top, just lightly to kind of flatten that down again. And again, squidging the sides. You really want all those holes that you just made to completely disappear. Be careful at this point because you can get air trapped. So kind of it's one of those scenarios of practice makes perfect. The first few times you do it, you'll probably get some air trapped. But you'll learn, like, I learned after my first few times of doing it that if I kind of make the dottings quite slowly and carefully and do this bit quite slowly and carefully, the air that gets trapped is reduced by quite a bit. So I'm still squidging there, squidging away, rolling across the top. And you can see this is starting to look a bit like, looks more like how it did to begin with. So you flip it over and you basically do exactly the same thing again to the other side. So this time, as well as my dotting tools, I'm using some circular cutters to create some cuts. I push them all the way through the clay and then lift them up and just leave the clay where it is. And then I used the smaller one, but as you can see here, it gets stuck in the clay because the clay is so thick. So if that happens to you, I just grabbed a couple of pliers to pull it out. And then it came out nice and easy. Voila. So once you've done all your dotting and you've made sure you've gone right to the edges and you've used all the cuts that you want to experiment with, you want to squidge in the sides again like we did before. So again, just take your time with this, try not to trap any air, and squidge in the sides and then use an acrylic roller across the top to ensure that your clay stays the kind of original rectangular shape. And then once again, you want to flip it back to the original side that you did this on and do the whole thing all over again. Once again, once you're finished on that side, you squidge it all together as before. And then you want to flip it over and do it again on that second side. So essentially you do the first side, flip it over, do the second side, and then do that whole process again. So each side gets done twice. So once you've done that, you want to cut the sheet across the top. So you want to cut along the same side that you were doing the dotting tools on. So I'm just trying to shave off kind of a couple of top bits there just to check what it looks like and to check if it kind of is looking how I want it to. So what you want to do is just, as you can see what I'm doing there, is just shaving off a couple of really sort of small slithers off the top there just to reveal the pattern underneath. And yeah, it looks kind of exactly how I imagined. So you can see here on this reference image, this is kind of the effect that I was going for. And that's how it looks. If it doesn't look how you want, you can carry on doing more dotting, but for me, I think twice on each side is enough, basically. So now what you want to do is continue squidging your cane, because it will have air in it still. You just slice those top bits just to check what it looked like, but now you want to carry on squidging it. So carry on doing what you were doing in between sides, just squidge the sides and then use the roller along the top, because you don't want to end up with a long kind of cane type log. You need to squidge it, but you still need it to retain the same kind of shape that it was when you first started this technique. So it's really important to squeeze out all that air, otherwise when you start cutting this, you're going to have holes in it. It's totally up to you how you want to cut your cane. At this point, I normally cut it in half because I find it really difficult to slice along the top there. So I tend to cut it in half, stand it on its side and slice it this way. What you want to do is you just really need to make sure that you're slicing along the side that you were dotting. You can slice the shorter sides, but it will just give you a completely different effect. So have an experiment and see what you prefer, but I prefer to slice down the side that I was doing all the dotting on, because as you can see here, it gives this kind of swirly effect. Now you can see in my pieces of clay there that I've got some holes because I haven't squidged it enough. So don't make the same mistake as me and make sure you squidge it. So with these pieces that I've just cut off, I basically just run them through my pasta machine and then sometimes fold them, as you can see me doing here, and run through again until I essentially have a slab that I can cut out shapes and work with successfully. You can see here I'm just smoothing out any little kind of nicks or anything, and then I have a slab that I can work with. So I just kind of do that. I just slice away at the cane, pop it through the pasta machine, and then I end up with lots of small slabs that I can cut out my shapes from. So there you have it. I'm really looking forward to seeing your interpretation of this technique and the colours you use and the shapes that you use. As I say, have an experiment, but if you are using a dark colour, I tend to find it's better to use a little bit less of that dark colour than all the other colours, otherwise it tends to kind of overwhelm the slab. But yeah, I really hope this has been helpful and I can't wait to see what you will make.